Hello and welcome to this edition of Dr. K's Psychobabble, where we're going to be continuing my series on behavior management. A little bit of a twist today. What we're going to be talking about is social interaction. And I want to talk about this in a number of different ways. First, we look at it as a principal intervention model when we are talking about behavior management, is to engage in a conversation. A social interaction between yourself as the creator of the behavior plan and the other person who wants to be on a behavior plan, talking to them about it, describing it, for the most part, very upfront, no secret, no hiding things. You're not trying to trick people into doing behaviors. You're right up front. You do this many times, this often, this is what you get. Pretty straightforward. The same kind of language that we would engage in if we were interviewing for a job, which is essentially negotiating a behavior plan. So I'm sitting at an interview and I ask about the job. I want to know what it is that you want to do. I want to know my hours. I want to know the expectations and all that. And then what are you going to give me? What's my pay going to be? It makes no sense not to talk about that entire contract at any given point in that kind of interview sort of place. We're negotiating a behavior contract. So that's the first way to kind of look at this. The second way, I'm going to take the descriptive aspect of the ABC Contingency Theory. In fact, I sort of presented that. There's the whole thing about social interaction. That's done. What we're going to talk about first is going to be the analysis of a conversation using the ABC Contingency Theory. So we're going to look at that first, and then we're going to look at communication itself and some of the barriers that exist in our efforts to engage others in understanding what we're trying to tell them. So let's take a moment right now and take a look at the ABC Contingency Theory. Now we're looking at antecedents, behaviors, and consequence. You know that antecedents, essentially sort of the stimulus or the situation that brings about the behavior, and the C is the consequence or the resulting feedback, reward, punishment from that behavior. Now, when we look at a conversation, people taking turns in speaking to each other, we might see this as a you said, then I said, and you said, then I said, and you said, and then I said, and then, whoever gets the last word, I guess. This conversation, if you think about that sequence of events, notwithstanding ways in which people communicate where they're interrupting or bringing in extraneous material or ignoring each other, those are all dysfunctional ways of communicating. If you're just looking at that exchange, you'll notice that each exchange, each time I wrote, I said, or you said, each one of those, that little thing is an A, a B, and a C, all at the same time. So if we look at the first one, I said, there's an A out there, like I want to tell my wife something. I have a motivation to communicate something to her. So that's the A. I see the opportunity and I say something. That's the A and the B. I say something, she says something back. That's the consequence. But my saying something is the A to her B. So she says something to me, and then I say something back. My behavior is the C for her behavior, and it's also the A for her next behavior. And you see how each one of these characteristics has that A, B, and C quality to it as we're having this exchange. Now, when we look at sort of categorizing it, we say, let's just look at the antecedent part. When we look at the antecedent, are we being clear? Are we communicating what we want to communicate? Are we using language that they understand? This is all the things that we would normally associate with constructing a plan around the antecedents. Does that embody itself in the statement? Right there, that A. Then we look at the B, the behavior itself. When we act, this would be the mechanisms by which we ask questions or make statements, the tone of voice that we use, the specific word choices that we make. Is it, to our goals? That's specifically what we want to see. And then in terms, how do we evaluate if I'm looking at an A, I want to talk to my wife about something, I create a statement to initiate that discussion, and her behavior is going to be my consequence, which is going to tell me whether or not I was successful in answering the call to the A with my B. And you can see where this can become a misunderstanding or a clear communication. So if I am successful in asking the question or making a statement, and I'm looking for something, I'm looking for a response, I'm looking to engage or start a discussion, depends on her behavior, and that's the C that reinforces or punishes if I don't get what I want. Now, when we look at that kind of analysis, when I don't get what I want, we have to be careful to take the behavioral viewpoint, and that my B was not a sufficient A to produce the B, which is also my C, that I wanted. So if there's a problem to identify, it's not in her B, it's in my A, B thing. So locating the problem in communication is always one step back. So if I don't get what I want, I have to analyze what I'm doing. Is my tone wrong? Use of words? Am I misunderstanding this? Do I have to clarify? And taking on that responsibility that when we don't get what we want, we don't get the reward that we want, it means that we need to adjust our B so that it is a more effective antecedent for the behavior we're hoping will happen on the other side of that conversation. That's a lot of psychobabble. That's just really over the top on that. But it's very simple. If I want my wife to pass me the salt, I have the need for salt at the dinner table arises, and I notice that the salt is closer to her and I can't reach it. So I initiate a B that says, "Hey, Katie, can you pass me the salt, please?" Now I say her name. I'm very clear about what I'd like to see happen. And I put please. I'm nice about it. And then maybe even wordless. Maybe that's the end of the thing, her behavior and response. And then I say, thank you. You see how this is all going to happen? She doesn't want to put it over there. Nothing. She'll probably look at me and, well, it'd be nice to get a thank you for that. But you see how we construct that statement, and very different than just use your imagination about the different ways I can ask for her to pass the salt, which would be less effective unless I was just goofing around. It'd be certainly less effective. Maybe get salt thrown at me, whatever the consequences would be. Certainly my food would go without salt, or maybe too much salt, depending on her choice of consequences there. Okay. So what we've talked about so far in terms of the social interaction is the importance of social interaction when we are explaining and exploring creating behavior management plans with people, that we are upfront, we are writing it down, we're putting our signatures on them, we're being very clear about the behavior, being very clear about the reward mechanism that's there. Everything is right up front It's not secret. And it's important in terms, it's almost like it is in various ways, a therapeutic relationship. It has to be based on trust and honesty. So that's how you approach creating a behavior management plan with a student, with a child, with a coworker, with your siblings, with your partner. It's an upfront thing. It's like, here's what I'd like to do. The second part is we can look at conversations and we can dissect where problems arise. So as we try to communicate, and we'll see this when we talk about the barriers to communication, when we try to communicate, there's a lot of ways in which we can have misunderstanding. And it's important to take that one step back and say, okay, my behavior was an insufficient A for your behavior. It's not that your behavior was a negative. That can occur. I mean, if you do all your best and someone just, ignores you, obviously that's another issue. Regardless of your A, that individual choosing behaviors that are not conducive to a good conversation, but nonetheless. So good to have that analysis. So that's what we've covered so far. What I'm going to talk about now is that the actual mechanisms of communication, the goals of communication, and what the barriers that can exist between two people trying to get an idea across. So communication is essentially, we use communication because we intend on taking this idea, I put it in the frontal cortex, I'm going to take that idea, I'm going to put it over here in the language area of the brain, formulate words, and I'm going to create a message, and I'm going to say that message. Could be verbally, could be in written, could be in sign language. I'm going to send that message to the other person. Goes to their ear, not their mouth. That information enters their brain into the language processing and successfully replicates itself in their frontal lobe. I'm being a little campy about this, but I'm trying to get an idea that's clear in my head to be clear in your head. This is the essence of communication. It's the essence of education. It's the essence of training. It's the essence of instructions. It's the getting an idea from inside me to inside you. Now, that process encounters a number of barriers. And I just want to kind of laundry list this for you with some graphics to support my ideas. First, over here on the sender, at the sender's perspective here, that idea that is clear in my head may not be very clear to somebody else. We have to understand that what's in our head is in a context of thoughts associated with that idea. And sometimes when we communicate, we forget about the need for that background. Probably, this is the best example I can come up with that, is let's say you're trying to have somebody figure out the name of a song you know. And you can hear the melody in your head. But not only do you hear the melody, you hear some drums, you might hear, there's some contacts, maybe the riff on the guitar, maybe little keys in there. You're going to have the lilting voice. But all you can do is produce your poor oral presentation of the melody, and the person's going, nope, don't hear it, because all they're hearing is a small piece of that information. It doesn't add that context like it's inside of your head. So that sometimes we have to build the context around an idea so that we can build that into them and then communicate that information to them. So the next, we talk about our tone of voice. Hot, cold, volatile, etc. And then, of course, our choice of words. And not only, I imply curse words here, but trigger words. Or other ways in which we might communicate in a way that is ineffective. Maybe, and I'm sticking on, in this discussion, we're sort of talking about normal behavior. I'm not talking about abuse here. I'm talking about slip-ups that people who truly intend to want to communicate effectively, not to control people, but to get the idea across. That's what we're talking about. But those have barriers. Just our tone, we might have had, the day, how we're feeling, whatever, our relative sense of impatience may distribute itself in our tone, and our use of choice, our use of language, whether it's foul language or whether it's the use of words that we know are going to be triggering for that individual or inadvertently triggering for that individual. I think in here we might even see what we hear about in terms of microaggressions when we are in the intent is to take this idea of, I think you're a really cool person doing cool things, and I throw it out to you and I verbalize that, but I verbalize it in a way that contains some language that has social meaning that is different from my intent. So I watched a film on microaggressions once, and the individual was in a cab. They are of Japanese origin, but they were born in the United States. So their facial features, clearly Japanese. And the story that this person tells is they get into the cab and they start having a conversation with the cab driver. And the cab driver says, "Your English is very good." Now, the intent of the cab driver is to give him a compliment. But it reveals a social problem of, because you look different or because you look Japanese, you must be from Japan and your English is a second language, and wow, you really did a good job. And in identifying that microaggression is identifying the choice of words that disrupts the true intent of that message, which was to provide a compliment, and it actually turns into a little bit of a bite. And the microaggression idea is that for individuals, that can sometimes be a daily occurrence. And after a while, probably gets pretty tired of that. Okay, so here we have things that can happen on the sender side. There's also things that can happen on the receiver side. They may have precognitions they don't understand. It elicits emotional reactions from this individual, particularly when, poor choice words, and just same to you, buddy. That's not, I didn't intend on that. And then, that's the cultural perspective of the individual on the other side may not clearly understand those kinds of terms that you're using. Or you might, again, being culturally aware simply means you don't have to be, as far as my perspective is, you don't have to be totally, overly concerned about it, but be aware that there are times in which cultures clash unintentionally, and be ready to take responsibility for that. I think in the times that I've engaged in a microaggression, for example, and I've been called out on it, I'm readily able, and I make an effort to take responsibility for that. That's not the time to have some sort of philosophical discussion about it. The time is like, hey, no, that's not at all what I meant. Let me try to rephrase that, blah, 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 or educate me. Tell me what I said. Those kinds of things. So, other barriers to communication can be found in the time delay in communication. Now, again, I'm talking in general ways here. A lot of my research is focused on interactions that happen in the online classroom. And one of the differences between an online classroom and a face-to-face classroom is the time delay in getting a question answered. So if you're in a classroom and you ask the professor a question, we really kind of expect the person's going to give an answer, within a few seconds. And just walk away would probably not be a good idea. or maybe they don't have the answer, but there's a response. I'm sending out that my behavior is your A, give me a B, and it's going to happen pretty soon. When we're in an online environment and we're asynchronous, meaning you're going to leave messages for me, and I, as the instructor, I'm going to come and read those messages at a different time, and I'm going to send you back messages which you're going to read at a different time, that there's much more space. And that can degrade the quality of the conversation. You have to get into a mindset, like when I send something out, and I'm expecting a time delay, I have to remember the mindset I'm in. I have to be cautious of the mindset. I may be in a place where in fact, it might be even more enticing for me to express frustration and anger in that way because there's a time difference. I don't have to deal with the reaction right away. You have to be mindful of the quality of that communication that we send out, knowing it's going to be read at a different time and they're going to respond to us at different times. That delay is important to recognize. Now, in addition to that, we have physical distance. Now, whether that physical distance is within a room or across the globe, the actual physical distance creates a barrier for communication. For me, for instance, when I'm in a classroom and I'm talking, engaging in some didactic, with one of my students, kind of going back and forth there, I tend to approach student, get closer. I probably scoot down or I'll pull a chair over and I'll get right with that individual to engage in that conversation, almost like a little fishbowl. So everybody's looking out. If you're familiar with the fishbowl method, you do something as an activity in the middle while everybody watches. These opportunities to shrink the transactional distance and become more intimate in that exchange provides for a great example to everybody that's looking in. And then, of course, we have technology. This was the focus really of my research, is the focus of my research. Technology. Whenever we add technology, it creates a barrier. That is just part of it. Video technology, all that. Through the pandemic, thank God we had Zoom. Thank God we had, or at least many people had, high-speed internet. We had ways of communicating, because it would have been much worse. But we had those tools, but yet every one of us felt further away from people. It's not the same thing. You watching this video is not the same thing as attending one of my classes. Even though I might say a lot of the same things, it's not quite the same thing. And so technology, every time we insert technology, even when it's a cool technology like video conferencing or live chats or live Zoom meetings or something like that, it's still a barrier. It introduces barriers that are different than face-to-face communications. It is not, this is the thing, it introduces barriers. It also removes barriers, brings people who are far apart closer together. It eliminates the time delay. There's pluses to this. It doesn't, none of these things, time delays, physical distance, and technology, all of which create barriers to communication, also remove barriers to communication. So there's costs and benefits for each one of these. And the focus of my work has been to look at the cost-benefit ratio of doing online learning. Is there enough pluses that come along with the asynchronous quality of many online learning experiences to overcome the losses in communication? Now, each one of these barriers creates, as you saw as I made the people go further apart here, we call that transactional distance. So if there's a time delay and physical distance and technology, that increases the transactional distance, increases the likelihood for error in communication. That's it. There's all kinds of benefits for increased transactional distance, for using technology, for, being able to bring people. It's good sometimes for people to be far apart. And sometimes, let's say, for example, someone's in a heated argument. Maybe the couple will go to different rooms and exchange letters. And that increased in transactional distance allows them to think a little bit more about what they're going to say. We do that in couples therapy, where I'll meet with one and meet with the other, and they have a chance to communicate with a little bit more transactional distance between them. There's no good and bad here. It's all just how do we engage and make sure that we have the best communication possible. So let's kind of review this a little bit. The barriers to communication. We have our intention, which is not always what comes out. We have the clarity, tone, and word choice, efforts to make our ideas very clear. We have the cultural perspective, taking into consideration time, distance, technology, and transactional distance. Okay, and that's what I wanted to talk about. So all of this, as you can see, we talked about the importance of interactions, social interactions, when we're creating behavior plans. We can use the ABC Contingency Theory to analyze a conversation and see where things are good and see where things are going awry. And then we can actually look at communication itself and the kind of struggles that we have to communicate clearly, and how important it is to be patient and understanding and give people time. And if it's important to say, as the Ents told the hobbits in Lord of the Rings, if it's important enough to say, it's important enough to take a long time saying it. I guess that's wisdom from J.R.R. Tolkien right there. All right, so that's it for now. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you on the flip side.